So in 5 years, there will not be any problems on site anymore, John, or is that what you're telling us?
So I don't think in 5 years there will be no problems on site anymore. There will be other problems still, but let's hope it will reduce a bit.
But Stefan, I'm surprised that you have problems on site because of the off-site fabrication you do. I mean, if you have problems on site, then things get really expensive, don't they? At least that's what a student in my undergrad class would ask.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think it's unbelievable, I know. But yeah, we have the problems like MEP and HVAC components are really complicated sometimes, so yeah.
Anyway, yep, let's have an opportunity for you to interact with the speakers here. There's in the front was the first hand up, but okay, I guess I'll be the second. Sorry, Johnny.
Hi, my name is Stefania from Brazil. I was listening to Taylor's presentation and then Stefan and Kerner presentation. Kerner.
Jano.
Yeah, and I am actually asking myself if we use VR, then shouldn't we use AR at the job site because everything should be well resolved, so we won't have clashes anymore, right?
So generally, what happens is you will help. Like, if it doesn't have to be VR, you don't need necessarily VR to resolve issues on sites. There's clash detections and so on that's happening before. The problem is people don't necessarily do what has to be done. Like, even if the design would be perfect, still there will be mistakes on site because the workers on site, they don't necessarily get the idea right if you have plans. So the overlay at the end helps them to understand what they have to build before they build it. That's like one part. And still, even with that, because of the design changes, there will be still mistakes. Like, for example, very common situation you will have is the sanitary installations will come, they will put some pipes there, and they will not maybe have followed everything to the point, or there will be design changes. And then at one point there's like some people like the electricians building the cable trays. And then it will collide with that because there's been some changes made to the situation. Or again, the situation was not, or the design was not implemented as it should be. So you don't, even if the design is 100% perfect, the site has to be also 100% perfect. And that's hard to do if people don't understand what they have to do perfectly too.
And just to add, I feel like those are different use cases too. In VR, we're getting feedback on things that are not necessarily conflicts, so you wouldn't necessarily see it during installation either, right? It's different stakeholders that would be engaged in VR than the site team that's building and what you're talking about with validating what's installed. There's still limitations even with AR because not everything's in the model, right? It depends on your contracts and what you've agreed upon. On hyper big projects, we might not have the controls modeled, for example, the small conduits that are just a single pathway. But we do have in our contract that if it's not in the model, you have to work around everything else that is in the model. And so what we found the most efficient is if there is an issue on site, what is in the model? And then if it's wrong and not following the model, or if it's not in the model, you're the one that has to do the rework. So as soon as the trades realize that they have to tear out their work and redo it because they're not following the model, then they very quickly get on board with making sure they're following the model. So again, I think it just depends on what your outcomes are and what you're looking to do with it.
So my name's Anish, I'm from Striver. I'm collaborating with Rashi today, and I wasn't on the presentation. But I'm not from the construction industry, so I'm not even going to go there. But the way we think about VR and AR from a technology perspective is there's a progression. At Striver, we have this saying, you hire an employee, you train them, and then you help them do their job. So it's hire, train, do. And this parallels to the construction industry, right? Design is collaborative, you do that in VR, but you have to help people on the job. And so there's this progression of technologies. VR is useful in a certain part of the phase of the work, and then AR helps you when you're on site, doing your job. So there's place for both.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Johnny from Veni. Just to make sure no mispronunciation, so I'm going to address Gamma AR. Hello, Gamma.
Awesome.
Just wondering about use cases, because we've seen AR applicable a lot of places, and it really is interesting. But I'm wondering about what is the accuracy and the tolerance of the placement of the components, and the follow-up question is, which factors determine these tolerances?
So regarding these tolerances, there are multiple factors, and I think we have to divide the question into two parts. One is the placement of the model, and then later on I will get into that too, drift that occurs because current hardware. So that's just like this. Regarding the placement of the model, you can be below 1 centimeter today. It's sorry, I will be metric because yeah, like below 1 inch for sure. so in that regard, you're able to place the models like very, very precisely on the site. And then regarding, let's say, the tracking abilities of the hardware, that depends on the hardware that you have, which is one factor. Another factor is the lighting conditions. And then the other one is finally how orderly the site is, because actually it's better if it's not that orderly. If there's more stuff to track, it will be more precise in that. That's just like the general rules. But from what we see is currently, even like there's two parts that are getting better and better there. One part, if you talk about tolerances, is always the hardware is improving, and at the same time software is improving too. And the other part is you need to define for which use case you're using at the end the augmented reality. Today, I think it's really great to do qualitative checks and to explain what you have to build. And today, it's not that great, except again, if you position often, which you can do with our system, it's made for that. But then you need to place often, again, the model and correct the position of it a bit in order to ensure that you can maybe really, in a below 1 centimeter part, check what has to be built. I hope that explains a bit.
Yeah, so for today, the best use case is post-work checking or predicting what's going to happen. It's not for construction, right? For constructability.
So it is definitely for previewing the work, explaining what has to be done, because compared to any plan, it's like which is 0% overlaid. You have the direct check, and especially if you think about the progression of all the trades, you can directly check what your trade has to do compared to the other trades, and then see if you can spot mistakes.
Let's see, there's another question there, or is this directly following here? Is that okay if we have a directly follow-on question, and then we go to you?
Have you tried, Gunnar? Almost the same. Have you tested schedule integration to see what's going to be installed today, and this is how the site will look when you come there today?
Not directly. What we did, what isn't built into Gamma is you can get the phases out of the models, and if you have the phases defined, it's there. But we didn't combine it currently, for example, with MS Project or so, because it's like a more additional task that it needs to be done today. Even though if the data is inside, let's say, again, phases, it's inside.
Good morning, Tomislav Klejko. I have a kind of cutting versus bleeding edge question for the entire panel.
Sorry, I know who you are, but I didn't
Oh,
catch the name.
Tomislav Klejko. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah.
So it's a cutting versus bleeding edge question for the panel. We've seen over the last 5, 6, 7 years a range of XR, AR, VR technologies. And one of the things that really slowed down adoption for us, for example, was ability to deliver the model data in a consistent way to the actual device. The bigger the model, the more complicated the process was. There was a lot of breakdowns. Streaming data wasn't always working. So I'd like to understand, how are you solving this problem today? Because just like last week, we were reviewing 2 gigabyte MEP model for a hospital, which is kind of significant. How are you solving that problem today? Then Where is the ROI on conditioning the model and preparing data in real time in order to take the advantage of this capability? Thank you.
So regarding the 2D that you're looking at, I think initially we have specific trade provisions in our contracts that require a certain level of modeling. So just baseline, we're setting up the expectation that we will get a 3D model we may even define the file type. And we will certainly let them know what kind of extensions we need out of that model. And specifically for Resolve VR, it's using Navisworks files as the reader. That's what you're viewing. Whatever you see in Navisworks is what you would see in Resolve. So that one's pretty simple since Navisworks integrates all different file types. And we're already creating a federated model for coordination purposes. So there's not a ton of added work. You're not having to go through and change file types or like break up the model because they have a Wellington engine, I believe is what it is for their rendering. And they have some coding in the background that interpolates things that are further away. So it actually handles the really large files because it's only detailing out what's close to you. So in terms of software is able to handle super highly detailed big models, Resolve is able to do that. And I think that's a pretty big game changer. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you mentioned file types.
Assuming the model is already there, a large one, the hardware and software breaks when the model is too large. How are you solving the problem today?
Yeah, what I'm saying is it doesn't break when the model is very large. Resolve VR specifically. In the past, if there was a platform that was unable to handle the file size, then we would have to section down and break up the model. We might use iConstruct or another platform to help automate that, but we'd be maybe we were just doing it in Revit, where we're creating section boxes of an area and we're pushing to NWCs from Revit, right? In the past, we've had to do that and section the models into smaller chunks. Even for our coordination models, we don't have to do that anymore, is I guess what I'm saying.
Okay.
Maybe I can add to that too. From current technology's perspective, it at the end depends on what you want to achieve as a company for your clients. In our case, we follow strictly the philosophy. It has to be easy, so we optimize the hell out of it. So at the end, what happens is everything that you load in is. You don't need to split up the models, so you don't have to take care of all this stuff and so on, which would be additional work. Nobody will do that, so that's the case. So what we do in that regard is everything that you see is basically even still offline, streamed from the local memory to the viewer. That's it. So, but you don't need any network connection, so it's just like internal streaming at the end. So you don't see, for you it's the same behavior technically, but generally it's getting streamed into the memory. So currently the memory limit is not anymore an issue. The bigger issue is more let's say, if you have like a 20 gigabyte Navisworks model, that might be like probably 240 in gigabytes in terms of memory, then you should have enough memory, let's say just storage device in your device, but that's it.
So I'm asking this question on the behalf of Mizel, who is a participant on online audience.
Ashwin.
Yes, so I'm Ashwin and I'm asking this question on behalf of Mizel, and participant in the online audience. So Mizel wants to know that how long does it take to prepare the model for a walkthrough in the meeting that you might want to do?
Oh, is that for VR? For me?
Sounds like it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like I said, we're already creating the models for clash detection. So when you're preparing it for VR, you're just doing a save as an NWD and then uploading it. So that takes maybe all of 5 minutes. If you're talking about setting up the model for clash detection, I think that's a different conversation. It obviously depends on your means and methods and what platforms you're using. But in terms of like, it's integrating into a process we already have in place, so there's not a ton of added work to be able to get it into the VR space.
So actually, I've been wondering about some. Oh, sorry. Did you have wanted to comment on that as well, John?
No, it's all good.
Yeah. For Rashi and Anish, when you prepare the VR training experiences for the customers like Walmart or many you mentioned, what is the longest part in that process? Is it that they have to define what is a good education outcome, or do they have that already? Because I could see that might be a challenge. Or maybe not. You guys in the audience, correct me if I'm wrong there. Is it that they have to agree now internally, this is really how we should do this part of the job, or is it something totally different? I'm bringing up these two particular things because that's where I could see that we would have to invest some time to leverage the platform that you have. And it would be great to hear your experiences in this respect.
Yeah. I can take a crack at it. So I think one of the biggest parts that we do is, if you remember from my presentation, there was a 7-step process of the services segment once we sign the deal and we want to kind of help the customers and set them up for success. So the first step in that is strategy building. And so we have a team of solution architects and enterprise consultants who sit down with the learning academy or the group of stakeholders who are engaged with us to kind of think about what are the most useful learning outcomes that have the best VR application, where there can be a direct impact and a measurable impact that we can really see. And in most cases, we're looking for reduction of cost, and we're definitely looking for high engagement and high recall. And so typically that's when the customer would come in and tell us what are some of their biggest challenges that they are faced in. In retail, currently, a lot of the challenges are faced is in armed robbery, armed attack, shrink, inventory management, and the like. Whereas in the banking sector, we've seen some of the biggest challenges to be more in fraud de-escalation, customer services, onboarding, how do you kind of handle difficult conversations with customers, and everything that the banking industry is facing right now. And so those use cases are very different, but that's when our team kind of comes in, and we have multiple strategy sessions with them to understand what's the best use case and what's the biggest application for it. The other part that I think that takes a lot of time, where we spend a lot of time with customers, is creating the content modules, content production, and kind of figuring out what should be the key learning objectives, what is it that we're trying to track, and what is it that we're trying to understand in terms of behavioral change that we're trying to drive, and the gaps therein that we want to create for the users.
Okay.
Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think for VR in general, virtual reality, augmented reality, I think if you think about sort of the adoption, I mean, VR started at 2014. Sort of the biggest sort of, I'd say challenge or rock to uncover is content production. Like it takes time and dollars to build highly impactful, immersive experiences. But today Strive was using a lot of, starting to research and use a lot of generative AI. So you think about scripts. There's a lot of learning process methodologies that's out there. We can help instructional designers generate 70-80% of their scripts through AI. Think about the assets used to build an environment or scene. There's text to 3D systems now, text to voice that do auto lip sync. So a lot of that cost I see, at least from a technology inflection arc perspective, is going to come down. And I think that's what's going to actually propel VR and AR to the next level, is the cost and the time curve for content production to come down. I feel like the technology is here today for us to all take advantage of it.
Hi there, Jacob Raskin with Structured Tone again. Construction sites, mines, manufacturing facilities are very dynamic and dangerous places. I've had a couple opportunities myself to be in a headset and shown a 3D model, some good things, but what I cannot get past is the safety issue. I have a very hard time seeing people in my care walking around glued to an iPad, or in my opinion, worse, completely obscuring vision with the VR headset in a place like a job site. And to the learning creation side too, there's some great applications, cut the red wire, not the black wire. Like we can imagine a training scenario like that kind of, or a remote guidance or a robo-surgery type thing. But when you're in something dynamic and there's a backhoe zooming around behind you, I have a very hard time recommending that someone have something over their eyes or consuming their attention. How do each of you guys have perspectives on addressing that issue, and how might the hardware, the technology be addressed in the future to this end?
Yeah, maybe I can add something to that, because we get this question, as you can imagine, sometimes. So far, it has never been, though, a big unresolvable topic. So what is important is, as you are seeing something through it, you are not like outside at the end your world. It's not like you are looking to an iPad and it's like opaque. It's you have at the end a see-through option, and this allows you to see what's happening, and it's not covering all your facial area. So generally, in that regard, the safety, let's say, instructors or regulators in that, you will have people who will be more careful and will recommend then to their, let's say, site engineers, superintendents, to just stay there when they overlay it with the reality, and then don't necessarily walk too much. Not, at least not like without focusing on some, let's say, dangers that might be around them. But most of the time, as you are seeing through, it's like a window. So, yeah.
For VR, they are not on the job site. They are likely in the job site trailer or at a desk somewhere else, and they're very likely sitting down because that's the most comfortable, and you set up your Guardian, and if you get close to the edge, if you are standing up, then you can start to see, it'll alert you. So for VR, I don't think it's as much of an issue because you wouldn't be on the job site, and I would never plan for that to happen. For AR or something like robotics, you might have to have some safety measures in place, right? Like, safety should be at the forefront of anything. And when we've used AR on our job sites with HoloLens and HoloLive, we made sure that it was never someone alone. You always had someone with them, and you have, you plan for it, and you have procedures in place to make sure that you're in an area where there's not work going on. Or I feel like it comes down to the planning and making sure that safety is an element of that versus, being just releasing everybody with headsets or iPads out in the field. I think you have to be really conscious as a company to integrate safety into everything that you're doing.
Sounds like a VR training opportunity to you, how to use AR in the field. But actually, this reminds me of a use case that I wonder whether you guys are working on or have run across or is ahead or it's a silly use case. It occurred to me the other day as I was biking home from campus, and I had to navigate around a whole bunch of pedestrians that were all immersed in some virtual reality on their phone, that the reverse information flow would be helpful. So now we are focusing on creating digital content and bringing it to people and bringing it to the field, projecting the field. But how about projecting the reality into the virtual world? Whatever that might be, whether they are looking at the cell phone and say, okay, there's a curb here, or a bicycle is coming, or in the VR world, to bring the reality more to the people that are a step removed, or in a training session, same thing. I imagine that is a part there. So yeah, are you guys working on bringing the reality into the virtual world? And if so, for what use cases?
Yeah, I think I wanted to kind of address that what you mentioned right there is exactly what we are trying to mitigate as a risk, right? The whole idea of athlete training was to be able to do simulation and to be able to do repetition efficiently in a safe environment, so that before you are in that real world experience and you're experienced with any kind of a safety hazard or any kind of a critical situation like robbery or armed attacker or what have you, the idea being that simulation first happens and the most immersive experience in terms of a real world experience, but sitting in the safety of a room like this. And so that is the basic ethos and foundation under which we do training. And our training would never be with headsets being on the job site, like my co-speaker also mentioned. I think the only other thing to mention would be that a lot of the training that we're doing and a lot of the simulation that we're doing, I think it's done keeping in mind that spatial design is a very big aspect of it. There is a lot of feedback, though, and I'll be real about it, where a lot of people find headsets to be a little heavy, a little clunky. It could be like, oh, I'm feeling quite dizzy in this. And a lot of that is changing with new hardware coming into the market and more companies investing in this space. And if you have tried any of the latest models of Oculus or any of those types of headsets, I feel a lot of that is being addressed in the technology as well.
Martin, to answer your question, like a company like Striver builds the software for the headset, but there's two of the biggest companies in the planet in Silicon Valley, Meta and Apple, solving this problem and throwing billions of dollars at this technology called pass-through or presence or mixed reality. And if you've tried the new Meta Quest Pro, the presence is actually quite good. I haven't tried the Apple headset, but it's supposed to be phenomenal. And I think like that is what Apple sees as the vision, is what you said. Take the user, leave the user in the environment that they're in, right? And so obviously you can tell I'm very fascinated by technology and I'm super positive about where the world's going to go, but I feel like we have some serious R&D being done to make what you said happen.
Simge Gergen from CIFE, a PhD student. I thank you so much for the insightful presentations. I would like to connect the session 1 and session 2 with a question. So session 1, we saw many both rule-based and also generative AI applications in construction, operation, design. So learning the data from the construction job site, the field issues, and also design issues, how do you aggregate? How are you doing maybe aggregate analysis and closing the feedback loop with the designers and the operations team and construction, learning from the potential issues occurring in many projects?
So the project that I was referencing has all of that data categorized. So every one of the issues is categorized as if it was a design issue or if it has a construction impact. And it also has the data behind it on who made the issue, if it was a facilities team member versus a designer versus maybe one of us on the GC side or a trade partner. So I would say we have scratched the surface at diving into the data. We've compiled it, but we have yet to explore maybe what some of the ramifications are. And then I will say that in terms of bringing it into lessons learned or feeding it, we're lucky in that our client builds this same, general product over and over again. So they will take the feedback that is given on a project, and if it's something that's like a critical issue that impacts their program, then they will make sure that they address it and bring it to like a programmatic solution.
Yeah, I can sort of speak to it from in the sort of the category that Striver plays, learning and training and development. We use, one of Striver's value propositions among many others is analytics or insights. We call it behavioral analytics. Basically, what Rashi said in a presentation was, we spend a lot of time analyzing the data we collect from the headset. We collect a lot of data from the headset. Where were you looking? What did you click on? What did you say? We collect significant amount of data every second. And we paint a picture for our customers that shows how their learners did in the headset. And if you think about VR, you think about the science, there's a strong conviction that the way you behave in the headset is very close proxy to what you're going to do in real life. And so if you're being trained to spot hazards and you're looking in a different direction, we can cluster that information about like your cohort of users is unable to spot hazards, and we look into why. Maybe it wasn't clear, maybe it wasn't, they were not looking in the right space, they were distracted by something else. And so we could start to, build those type of insights. And, that's what our customers really pay us the money for. Like there's a saying at Striver, people come to Striver for the magic of VR, but they stay for the data.
And I can just say in our case, the data has been collected by our customers, not by ourselves, and also the comparison towards what they were using before. Because it's so many, let's say, fine details that it's hard to track these kind of data automatically. And this has to be done at the end on site with like somebody that accompanies, let's say the superintendents, tries to understand what they wanted to do and how long it would have taken, versus then with augmented reality. Generally, in short, that's it.
All right, let's thank the panelists, speakers, for sharing their experiences.